Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of edtech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these edtech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 318. Andy Morgan from 2U. So I talk about it right at the start of this episode, kind of my history with 2U. So this was just a great conversation, kind of harkening back to that, but also always just have a real keen interest and curiosity around digital education and how it's been evolving over the past several years and kind of what's on the horizon. So Andy was kind enough to jump on for this episode and kind of give his perspective. 2U's been around doing this work, pretty committed to it for quite a while. So it's just been really great, grateful to them for my experience there, but also really neat to kind of follow along in their journey over these past several years. And they've gone through a bunch of acquisitions, that they've acquired other companies, really diversified their portfolio, and really kind of always been kind of blazing the trail of digital education and higher ed in terms of degree programs, short courses, non-degree offerings and stuff like that, but really always keeping it really deeply tied in and integrated to the institutions all over the world that they work with. So without further ado, please do enjoy this episode number 318 with Andy Morgan. I've been looking forward to this episode, this conversation for a long time. Folks aren't aware, I kind of started my higher ed tech career at 2U, kind of right at the ground level, entry level, as a student success coach. And I just learned a lot during my time there, meeting with folks that I was working with, and just kind of taking the opportunity to really, just explore an area that was just getting much more kind of fascinated with and interested in of, digital education, digital experiences for students in higher education. So a lot of fun is for 2U, and always kind of kept tabs on things that are going on. But really, this is the first opportunity on the podcast to really kind of get a little bit deeper with somebody. So appreciate you, Andy, for taking the time to join me for this episode. But we'll start as we always do. If you want to briefly introduce yourself, share a bit about your background, we'll dig in a little bit deeper with that. And then we will just kind of get further into our conversation with your sort of perspective and point of view on digital education as it stands today. But just kick us off with a little introduction.
Great. Thanks, Dustin. And it's great to be here today. So Andy Morgan, I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer here at 2U. Who am I? I'm a first generation college grad in my family. It's hard to, looking back now, I think that maybe triggered the fire in my belly to really get into the industry, albeit I had a big detour via an M&A and finance career starting in London. I moved to the States in 2013. And really the arc of my career has been applying that commercial finance background and then slowly going kind of through a strategic lens and then into operating and leadership roles over the last 5 years. And today I'm responsible for all of 2U's partners. So we have 250 plus partners across the globe, degree and non-degree partners. And as you know, Dustin, from your experience, 2U, our DNA is a partnership organization. So it is my team's role to kind of intersect between bringing all of 2U's capabilities, tech and services in service of all of our higher ed partners.
Yeah, and just to kind of dig a little bit deeper on sort of, a day in the life of a CPO, a Chief Partnerships Officer, because I think even just thinking back, just within the kind of the context of 2U as an organization, that idea of even just kind of really investing more in sort of non-degree or shorter, kind of courses and different things like that. I think that has just been, the story of organizations like yours, but just digital education is just sort of diversifying the options of how learners can just engage at all or engage initially with an institution of higher learning to pursue their academic and professional goals and all that. So as it stands now, there's obviously just so many different kind of, sort of contextual factors on, I guess, both sides of a, partnership or a potential partnership. Just any anecdotes, I guess, that you can share, because I guess it's really for me the curiosity of like, I'm sure it has changed so much since like, my time of getting, the opportunity to be a little bit closer to it. But like here, as the recording February 2026, what's a day in the life look like for the CPO at 2U?
Yeah, well, my day starts early, and the first thought that goes through my mind is, are my children awake yet? Once I get past that, I get into the office pretty early, and I think I try and carve out time in my day to think, and particularly early. And right now, 2U is over a decade and a half old, right? In many ways, and we've been through a lot on that journey, right? With the journey of edtech, with the journey of higher ed over those kind of 17 or so years. I think a lot about this dynamic market we are in and how the 2U of 2030 needs to show up to kind of help support and solve the challenges with and on behalf of our institutional partners that are everywhere in the industry right now. But more tactically, I think about my day and my weeks are split into kind of three big categories. The first is our partners. As I said, we have 250 plus partners. I'm on the road a lot. I speak to partners. I speak to deans. I speak to provosts. I speak to presidents. I like to know not just how we are performing today, but what are their expectations for 2U this year, next year, 5 years from now? Because we've got to then push that back into our teams and our strategy. The second thing I spend, or the next group of people I like to spend a lot of time with are my team, and making sure we're there because we're like the front door of 2U, right? Into higher ed. And so making sure we are supported, we have the right team, we have the right strategy, and we're working with our colleagues across the organization, from tech to student success to enrollment teams, to make sure we're building and bringing the best of 2U every single day. And then finally, I like to take that, and I spend a lot of time with our exec team, with our leadership team, with our investors, with our board, to really make sure we are taking all of that information and thinking about what does the 2U of 2030 look like? And how is that different or similar from the 2U of 2020? And the way I like to describe it simplistically, Dustin, is 2U is the same mission that it has had for a decade and a half, which is really to be a partner of record to the best institutions on the planet to help them innovate and grow and reach learners the way learners want to be reached in today's age. The difference is how that shows up, in today's market and with today's technology has whole new opportunities for our strategy, where we invest, in which technology, how we partner, what business models we partner with. And those are kind of the things that change with time. And that in particular right now, we're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we show up differently? How do we show up to serve the great institution? But how do we do so in a way that is entirely consistent and coherent with 2U's mission of a decade and a half?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a through line for this conversation will be sort of like reflecting on what was and looking ahead to the future. And just a lot of details there to kind of highlight, I think, is like, I think organizations like 2U that entering into the space more in earnest when I was there, of like being more global, working with institutions all over the country versus just being kind of mostly US based. And then certainly the idea of like achieving the same goal just in different ways, like giving, learners high quality digital education experiences. It's like, oh, well, yeah, there's just been like kind of different demands for different things there over the span of time. But I think there is also really kind of the idea that like for higher institutions, like it is not a guarantee that you will continue to survive and thrive just because like you have for however long, so for its own sake of like, yeah, we need to be kind of keeping that kind of virtuous cycle of like, what are the conversations we're hearing in the front lines with these, leaders at institutions, what's actually happening with our partners, like what's sort of like working, what's not, and, how to sort of like keep that going. But like just all that sort of keeping kind of in sync to make sure that you just continue to drive and sort of meet the demands, be flexible, adaptable, and all that for the future. Because I think that is what institutions are needing to do, is just sort of be like, okay, yeah, we need to be really conscious of like kind of right sizing and making adjustments to be able to continue serving today's learners and stuff. So I just feel like that's even like I guess if you could speak to that just as a brief follow-up, just generally to kind of your journey, but like that idea of institutions thinking differently about building their strategy with more intentionality versus just like, because I just remember this anecdote from this classic article about just like that idea of like change management in institutions. Certain people just kind of shrug and be like, I don't know, it just always seems to work out. So, like what, like that kind of just like, I don't even know what to call it specifically, but like, I feel like that is thankfully starting to kind of like, chip away or sort of wash away whatever what it is. Like there's some really great innovative leaders and institutions that are being like, we need to really build with intentionality to survive and thrive years into the future, not just be trying to kind of cut and scrap to just get, to the next semester or something. Like any sort of point of views on that, of like, that sort of culture of strategy building at institutions while you're talking to these like deans and provosts?
It's interesting because one of the observations I've had, I've been in and around this space at 2U and previously for a decade and a half now, in and around edtech, education services, partnerships with higher ed. And, one of my observations is we as the private sector, right? We as companies and we as edtech providers like to think about the huge shifts and disruptive changes that are going to happen tomorrow, right? And as you point out, Dustin, our partners are not just decades old, they're centuries old, right? And they're thinking about planning horizons in the decades, not quarters. And so that in itself, particularly in my current role, is a really interesting dynamic. Now, when I think about today, when I think about the higher ed of 2026, I think about the confluence or the overlap of kind of three big forces that shape that conversation. The first is, let's just be narrow, like online higher education, whether it's degree or non-degree. I mean, it is very clearly not, when 2U founded in 2008, 2009, the idea that a top 20 institution would have a graduate degree online, was almost fringe, right? Whereas you fast forward to today, and there are more online MBAs in this country than there are Costco's, right? Now that's a joke, but think about that. What does that tell you about supply, right? And so we have more, I don't have the exact data point in front of me, but there's many to this arc that there are more learners in traditional higher ed learning online than there are on ground right now. So I think we have clearly reached maturity of the idea of online education. And the anecdote I like to give is it's no longer like this sidecar that sits on the side. It's becoming deeply embedded and integrated. And that presents a whole bunch of opportunity for thinking about institutional strategies that serve learners how they want to be served, whether it's online, on ground, hybrid, right? For credit, not for credit, and all kinds of blended pathways in between, right? It's no longer about an online strategy and on-ground strategy. It's no longer about an alt-cred strategy and a degree strategy. In fact, I think that will fail, right? Particularly in today's fierce competition for eyeballs online, right? You need to present a coherent view. The second big dynamic I think about a lot and we see is kind of what's happening just across the Potomac River, right? In DC. So I'm here to you as in the DC area. And it's very clear that whether it's the maturation of topics we've spoken about for many years, return on investment for learners, tuition prices, debt levels, or whether it's, regulatory action in some form or fashion from endowment taxes to approach to international visas to Title IV of funding on graduate loans, right? Without getting into the specifics there. These are all elevating and escalating some of these core conversations. And then just practically, it's creating some amount of fiscal pressure on every single campus up and down the country, regardless of your ranking, right? And so, and then the third kind of big theme here is the age we live in, right? The age of AI. And, most importantly, that is always have to be anchored on the learner and how do we serve learners in tomorrow's labor market? But equally, it presents opportunities, right? It presents opportunities to rethink teaching and learning. It presents new ways to go to market through marketing apparatus. In fact, the digital marketing space has changed more in the last 12 months than the prior 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. The Google search-based world is completely changing in front of our eyes. So you put all of those things together, right? You have a maturing online space where it's maybe part of the mainstream. You have a very nuanced conversation about the role of higher ed with kind of a regulatory framing to that I think is, putting the social commentary to one side, putting financial pressure on institutions, and then a need to change. And I think about the 2U that needs to show up at 2026 at the intersection of those three things, right? How do we rebuild and serve, the capabilities and the technologies? How do we bring that private sector agility, right, into higher ed? But through these long partnerships that can evolve, that bring also the great things about the great higher ed institution, which have, stood for kind of both research and teaching rigor for centuries, right? And how do we kind of collectively skate to where the puck is going and serve up better products, better experiences, better outcomes, better ROI for learners in today's market?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think a really comprehensive kind of context here, and sort of setting the table stakes where I think it is that idea of like, there's a lot going on. There's a lot that I think is very, apparent or sort of top of mind, I would imagine, for a lot of leaders. If not, then I think it's kind of like, okay, you've been living under a rock or something, or you're deliberately trying to maybe just like, ignore it or something. And the idea too, I think that the pace of change and it being really tangible, I think is that idea of like all that sort of put together equals out to be really forcing the point of like, well, we clearly need to be doing something differently here as we're building our strategy, where like, in decades past, it's like, oh, well, like the pace of change was slow enough that I think we could kind of like trottle on with it and just sort of like, go slowly, or as slowly maybe as we wanted to. It wasn't really forcing the point as much, but like, it's like even things just like from a year ago are vastly different now. And so it's kind of, certainly there are a array of options as to how you could, really position yourself as an institution to be, in a strong place financially, where, maybe like making cuts is part of the equation, but it really is that idea of like, there's certain things that have become normal in the sense of just like the prevalence of them, of like, like an online MBA program or whatever. But then I know for me, like, it's always caught my eye seeing stuff in the media that's like kind of capturing surveys and just like the stats around, just more learners studying online, which I think you're also kind of including, where it's even, your students right out of high school or maybe taking a couple classes online, they're still residing on campus, or, just the idea of like the one growth area at institutions is their online courses, so they're like wanting to really, follow that. And then again, it's sort of the idea of like a lot of things being sort of irrefutable. So it's like, then, okay, well, what are you doing with this sort of like objective reality that is presented in front of you as you're, deciding to build your strategy? But I'm curious on that one point, though, like that idea of just the hard data showing like more younger students are taking at least some courses online, maybe even when they're residing at the campus or, whatever else. Just curious, like what you make of that and like how you think institutions will need to kind of rethink their digital education strategy versus it just being like, from like the 2U of yore, where it was just like, oh, it's just adult learners, or I don't know, maybe it's just graduate education or what, like that one kind of detail of how digital education's kind of continued to evolve as like sort of the student population demographics.
Yeah. I think the first most obvious, perhaps not obvious point to be clear on is, taking an existing degree program and moving it online is not innovation in 2026, right? And by the way, it's not even necessarily an automatic way of growing enrollments, right? Think about the online MBA space that we touched on earlier. The real question is, how does your brand, how does your institution design and stand out in today's market? And so, I really think, the winners, if I can use that phrase, in the higher ed space from an institutional lens, will be those that, relatively speaking, because institutions, have complex governance and decision-making frames, but relatively speaking, will have integrated strategies on how they go to market to serve learners, right? What does that mean? That does not mean that the School of Engineering pursues kind of a strategy that is completely divergent from the information school, right, or wherever data science sits within an organization. Within a school, within a business school, how do you think about a core MBA, an executive MBA, part-time, full-time tracks online, and or a constellation of non-credit courses or that could come out of concentrations that sit around that? Just tactically, in today's digital marketing and media space, how do you present that to learners as a coherent experience, as a coherent set of options versus a fragmented set of journeys that are just frankly confusing to the prospective learner trying to find the right course, the right program for them? And how do you do so in today's fiercely competitive, digital marketing environment? And so, we think it's all relative because there are very few institutions in today's market that have, they're run like a business with a CEO, right? There is by design fragmented decision-making processes. But I think those that can grapple with these problems thoughtfully and coherently, those that can put the student and the prospective or learner at the center of the design of the programs, the design of the portfolio, the design of the experiences, regardless of modality, right, or whether it's credit bearing or not. I think those institutions will thrive in this environment. The final thing I'll say, Dustin, here is if you look at the online space today in higher ed, it's still overweight, or maybe I should say it's still underweight the higher ranked institutions, right? Meaning those in the top 20 versus top 50 versus top 100 are increasingly, as you up kind of this notional sense of ranking, you have far more participation online. And I think what's going to be really interesting if you go back to those market dynamics we talked about at the start is I think the market we are in will lead to more progressive online and integrated strategies from the higher ranked institutions, if for no other reason than financial necessity. And I think what's interesting is about what that means for the whole space as it evolves.
Yeah, I think that is like a good way to put it, because it is like, it's sometimes unfortunate how much air gets sucked out of the room by, the Ivy League or whatever, in terms of just sometimes news coverage or whatever else. It's they don't actually, educate most of the learners in this country. But if one of those does something or doesn't do something, it's going to be very influential as sort of a leader of the pack kind of mentality, I think, in higher ed. And there is kind of the sort of near peer envy, or, the sort of desire to, just be more like them or kind of set yourself amongst them for a lot of institutions around the country. So yeah, I think that idea of there are just now kind of the kind of tried and true kind of test cases of, certain things around digital education and how institutions have kind of been more progressive about, integrating it and being really smart about it, and kind of more longitudinal kind of success and those sort of things. And just, the tools, the partners, and just all the sort of things, again, the table stakes are set, and again, all those other factors that are sort of going on. I think it's just really prudent of institutions to recognize that, that the demand is, only going to continue to grow. It's going to be different though. Certainly, you don't want to, follow along too much, I guess, with those sort of lagging indicators or sort of assumptions. And so it's just going to be just smart kind of investments in your ability to kind of I think I would even put an extra sort of circle, underline, highlight, whatever on the integrated notion, because I think I've observed anecdotally a lot that institutions you're kind of getting at with certainly non-degree stuff or whatever, it's oh, that's just over there. That's the continuing studies or whatever. And that idea that sometimes for better or worse, it is just stuff is going on and it's just sort of in its own little walled garden. And then you might be oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, I took a course there, but then it's there's just non-existent or just a vastly different experience if you're trying to kind of do some scalability with stuff or whatever else of well, yeah, I complete all these non-credit courses. I'd like to continue studying or whatever, so I think, yeah, doing it, but then doing it in an integrated way of, kind of nurturing a high quality digital education kind of portfolio and environment and experience at your institution. And there may be, certain school leaders or whoever else who may raise their hand first, are really eager and willing to be partners in that. But I think just being wise about, building coalitions at your campus while you're doing that, because I think that has been one sort of dispatch from, which I'll also say I feel to you has been around way longer than the time that it's been. I'm forgetting the kind of when it was founded, but just even kind of tracking from that time. I think that is one aspect that I think in hindsight certainly could just make a lot of things work a lot better. Is if an institution as a whole was really being yeah, we're going to be doing this and doing it in a very comprehensive coherent, kind of cohesive way. So I think that is a good bit of advice in sort of acknowledging, I mean, it makes sense for a lot of reasons, I guess, again, just all the contextual factors and just, it being much more competitive and all that. It's kind of, I guess, to an idea of like, you wouldn't want to just too tepidly just be kind of like dipping your toe in one little aspect of your campus of just, we're going to like kind of sprinkle in or whatever. It's like, be anticipating that like over the next handful of years, like we're going to really, need to be making some pretty large strides in this area. So let's think that way versus maybe doing too small of sort of just like, kind of beta tests or prototypes or pilots or whatever else. Like, I think it's that idea of like, we're going to be doing this. It's maybe more so about like, how are we going to be doing this of like, creating kind of a whole infrastructure here for kind of the digital education experience. So with all of that being said, because this sort of dawned on me, we always like to try to, really as a whole podcast network, always be kind of keeping conversations about AI at the forefront and really keeping them sort of diverse in the sense of like different perspectives and aspects of just how, it's influencing how higher ed operates, how it teaches, what it teaches about, and all those sort of things. So I am curious about anything 2U is doing on the AI front, whether it's like your just internal operations and how you're maybe helping institutions teach about or with their, how AI work, like any of those sort of things. Take this as you will. Just wanted to kind of get a brief sort of insight into how AI is sort of like melding into your all's work there.
Yeah, of course. Maybe before I answer the question in a second about within 2U's operations, maybe just one observation about AI and its interaction with higher ed. I think no one really knows what the labor market of 2030 is going to be like, but one of the things that is crystal clear to me is graduates of higher ed will need to have the dexterity to navigate that labor market, right? And I think no more so has that become obvious than in engineering and software, right? Where we need to be assuming there is a world where agents are building the majority of code, but we need to be graduating the graduates with not just the technical competence, but the like social, emotional, kind of cognitive dexterity to be able to lead and navigate in a new labor market in some of these fields. And I really do think in the world of post-secondary education, we've talked a lot about skills for a decade. We've also a lot talked about hard skills. I think it's really interesting what has been higher ed's, speaking from my own experience, right? I went first, as I said at the start of the call, first in my family to go to college, I studied economics, not because I'm an economist now, but like the things I learned in my bachelor's education are really what I apply now. It allowed me to think critically. It allowed me to write. It taught me to think. I think these are that's what I mean by these kind of social skills and skills of dexterity to navigate the labor market. I think that actually becomes an increasingly important role of higher ed that higher ed and the great institution needs to embrace, because that is what, the great institutions have aspired to deliver in their education for centuries, and it will become more important than ever in tomorrow's labor market and tomorrow's job for skills. Now, pivoting to 2U, I think the short version, Dustin, is everything you know about 2U, from its marketing and enrollment capabilities to its back-end operations and technology and services, to how we work with faculty and institutions to build exceptional learning experiences, could be rebuilt or upended by AI over the next 2 years. And we're really excited to rebuild that value proposition, but do so, as I said, with the technology of today. And maybe I'll give like 3 examples of that. So the first is everyone knows 2U as having exceptional scale capabilities across marketing and enrollment. And as I said earlier, what's happening in digital media and marketing, we have seen more changes in the last year than the prior decade. And I think that presents a unique challenge and opportunity to higher ed, just given the economic imperatives of finding your audience cost effectively, right? And so we are investing in a series of capabilities right now that we hope will allow our partners to thrive in this shift in digital marketing rather than navigate it. And I think that's really, really important. And 2U does so with the scale of its operation and the scale of its relationships in that ecosystem and brings that to bear. The second is operational excellence, right? Whether it's ensuring, you'll know, Dustin, from your time at 2U, we have technology, but that technology empowers the human to have an interaction, right, with faculty members, with students. And we're looking to really maximize that kind of human interaction with AI driving greater productivity of those human interactions and greater color of those wherever it is on the student journey. We see great opportunity there. But the third and perhaps the most exciting, I think, is, 2U with our partners builds and orchestrates a web of technology, right, that integrates well together so you have an exceptional experience. One of the great challenges of edtech, right, is it can be quite fragmented and difficult to deliver within an ecosystem at scale. So we are really excited to think about how, with our partners, we might orchestrate an integrated experience that rethinks teaching and learning based on the technology of today. And that is much more than putting a chatbot within an existing experience. I think at its core, learners consistently most appreciate the interaction with their peers, their interaction with their faculty members, right? And the scale that the technology provides to allow greater interaction, because learning is a social process, right? It is not a passive process. And so the ability we can bring to bear today's technology in the classroom that allows us to better scale faculty, better scale those interactions, scale production, I think creates a new opportunity for us to actually deliver entire new product models and experiences that we haven't quite thought about yet. And candidly, like if you look back the last 10 years of edtech and online higher ed, we can debate around the margins, but it's all looked quite similar, right? You watch a video, you read a bit, you take some assessment, you may have a Zoom, you may not, you may have some kind of interaction. And I think the ability to use AI within the classroom or in some form to fundamentally scale the things that learners get most out of this environment, I think is a really interesting goal. And we have a whole lab dedicated with thinking about those kind of innovations and bringing them to some of our select partners early so they can help co-create it with us and then scale that across our partner base with the body of evidence that hopefully gives them the comfort to move at the speed we would all like.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting moment because I think we're now, thankfully for me, because I haven't been sort of, exhaustively or sort of just been kind of obsessed with AI. I've been trying to just see what are kind of the tangible examples of things that are, proving successful for institutions and kind of all the ways that you were describing. And I think that it's not now just sort of kind of hey, well, trust me, you'll see or whatever. It's we are seeing a lot of benefits. And certainly the one that's kind of exciting for me mostly, especially recently with some things that I've even just personally worked on is that production piece. Cause I think it's an idea of knowing that it is, if you're going to do it well, especially from years past, it was going to be very labor and cost intensive and, take a good bit of time to produce a high quality online course and program. So now it's well, yeah, if we can try to use these tools to get there just even quicker and cheaper and whatever else, it's that is beneficial versus it being no, it's going to at least take months and months to record everything and edit everything and do all this kind of stuff and whatever. It's okay, well, yeah, I mean, that works better for everybody if we can just, do that production piece as good, just quicker and cheaper, and be deliberately kind of focused on that and working on it and testing it and all that. And again, I think taking, you're saying, kind of a measured approach to be kind of co-creating it with the institutions and all that, I think is a great way to approach it. But even now, I think it's fair to say that with some of the pieces around just being able to quickly kind of automate, pieces of workflows, get good summaries, get kind of, nudges of triggers and whatever else to, like you said, sort of, it's always been, I think, an aspiration and it's just becoming a much easier kind of reality, is that idea of if we can have these tools, bring together data points to empower better human-to-human interactions, whatever form they take, the faculty member with the student, a faculty member with a staff member, or certainly, you all as a partner organization, being responsive and supportive of things that you're seeing or things that are coming from the institution and whatever it might be. But because otherwise it's the things weren't happening. And the indicators weren't even aware to anybody, or it was very manual, again, time intensive effort to be kind of analyzing things I think, that's again part of this sort of like virtuous cycle of always just being really keen on kind of, what's working, what's not, and how can we kind of keep, kind of iterating and improving. Because I know I've even seen where, you build out a whole course, you're going to have multiple sections, multiple people teaching. They could use, AI tools to help sort of like, well, I want to frame this way. Could you like build a lesson plan for me? And again, it's like you're getting something like, like a draft of something. You're like, cool, okay, like here's a framework and outline. Like I can now kind of like put my fingerprints all on this, but like I just need help sort of synthesizing everything from section 2.3, all the content and learning objectives that we have in this. Could you like put it together for me? Like, and so each of those, hopefully like individual section facilitators can, get what's going to work best for them to help, convey the concepts to their students, or even again, vice versa, the students to understand things on their end. They can kind of get things framed in a different way, that just might work better for them. Or certainly even the stuff around like, Notebook LM, where it's like, I would like to listen to this, like a whole long article or something, like it's just all that kind of stuff. Again, it's really exciting. It's certainly, again, a lot of very tangible and kind of visceral changes that are happening. But as I see you up to end, as we always do, for like a final thought or call to action, I think it's that idea of like, we're in a moment of great challenge, but also great opportunity. And it's just, maybe a little bit of just sort of the mindset that you take with things. But I will give you the last word here, your final thought or call to action on all this kind of great stuff that we've been talking about on this topic of digital education.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I see it exactly as you just articulated. I think we are in a really important moment for higher ed. And, speaking for myself, speaking for my colleagues, speaking for 2U, we are really excited to continue to evolve 2U to ensure it best serves the great institution in this moment, and ensure that higher ed, doesn't just survive but thrives in this era. So, we have been a partner to some of, the most respected institutions on the planet for a decade and a half. And in many ways, that's where we draw our mission from, is how do we work through these long-term partnerships to ensure we collectively skate to where the puck is going. We bring the greatest of technology to bear, right? With a relentless focus on ensuring we're delivering experiences that meet the learner in today's labor market. And I think that challenge has been true, for decades. But with the context of everything we just talked about, the maturing space, the changes in higher ed, the changes in the labor market, the age of AI, I think, the partnership between academia and companies like 2U has never been more important. And we're really excited to kind of continue to take that into this next phase of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the frontier that is like presented in front of us, I think, with all the things that we mentioned of just, changing student demographics, just the, realities that institutions are facing, and, the leaders and how they're kind of building their strategy, and then the AI of it all and all that good stuff. Definitely excited for how folks are really tackling those challenges, and appreciate you for being willing to kind of have conversations about them, and, I think help in this way to just make sure people are kind of pointing themselves in the right direction and thinking about all the right things as they're navigating and confronting all these new challenges and opportunities and all that good stuff. So we'll have ways to connect with you and 2U in the episode description as usual. But just thank you so much for, just being willing to take this time and talk about all that you did.
Thanks, Dustin. Thanks for having me. It's an exciting time to talk about these things.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.